everyone, and welcome again to the Open Mic, the show where every episode I talk to writers, editors, agents, occasionally even a songwriter or a playwright, all about writing, their work, and the publishing industry, how they do what they do. Of course, am your host, Rich Ehisen. Very happy today to be joined by a very multifaceted author, Alexandria Weis. Her works include mystery, crime, fiction, suspense, thriller, romance, and even YA. And she's got a new book series coming out with book one hitting stores on August 2nd. So she's joined us today to talk about that. Alexandria, welcome to the Open Mic. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Richard. Nice to be here.
Do you prefer I call you Alex or Alexandria?
Alex. Everybody calls me Alex.
Okay. I made the presumption, but I'm
no, Alex is good.
Okay, good. Well, I do want to ask some questions about the St. Benedict series. So let's get started there. First thing is, I understand it's based somewhat in true events. So tell me all about it.
Okay, the St. Benedict series, well, actually, I live in Covington, Louisiana, and right down the road on the Bogafalaya is a small area called St. Benedict. And it is, there's a seminary school there, and there's an abbey there, and all these things you'll find in the book. So those are all true events, and everything is on the Bogafalaya, which is the little river we call here, and it means little river, and I believe it's Choctaw. But so I'm writing about the area I'm in. And of course, this is, the South, Louisiana. So there's always ghosts and something Gothic going on all the time. And so in that sense, yes, it's all based on the area I drive. I drive by the seminary school all the time. And so everything is, they say write about what you know. Well, I know Southeast Louisiana. I grew up in New Orleans. I grew up in the French Quarter. We moved to Covington outside right before Katrina hit. So we've been here ever since. And, that's what it was, writing about that and just putting all the things that I love, which is ghosts and scary stories and Gothic South and everything together, along with murder mysteries and mayhem and an old Southern family and all their dark secrets. So in that sense, it's all about that.
Well, that already sounds interesting. I have more questions about that. We'll get into it a little bit more.
Interesting or schizophrenic, one of the two.
Well, they're not mutually exclusive, right?
No, they're not.
I want to ask you too. You have a writing partner, Lucas Astor. Tell me a little bit about your working relationship and how you guys go about doing what you do.
Well, Lucas had the initial premise for the story about kids hanging out by a river. And one kid in particular, Bo, who does all these dastardly things to people. And he had the basic premise of the story. And I read what he wrote, and then I took it and I said, well, how do you feel? I think he had it in Kentucky, in a river in Kentucky. And I said, well, how do you feel about bringing it here and adding some ghosts and the spooky abbey and stuff like that? So we kind of collaborated on that. And Luke is he's very much a part of everything. He's funny. And I'll say, well, what about this? What about that? And doing this? And how do you feel about doing this? Initially, we started this as a standalone book. And we didn't think it would go any further, especially when you get to the end of the story. But me being me, I can take anything and turn it into a series. And I really love the characters I wrote. And I love the setting and the place and how it felt. And I really wanted to continue that. So from that was born the St. Benedict series, and all of this comes into the first book, River of Ashes.
Well, and like I say, the book's not out yet, so I haven't had a chance to read it. So usually I have read something before I start talking to somebody about it, but I've got enough of the scenario that it's this your main character you mentioned, Bo, sounds like a really bad guy. I think you described him as, the quintessential, he's the star quarterback and the, good-looking kid that everyone likes.
The golden boy of the town. The golden boy is St. Benedict, but his name's Bo Devereaux, and the whole Devereaux family has got a very much an evil streak in them, and it manifests in Bo. And what the series
describe him as a psychopath, right?
He's a psychopath, yeah. Anybody who takes pleasure in giving somebody else pain not sadistic, but in the sense of taking it to an extreme, a psychopath, and then having no remorse, no regret, no emotional attachment to it. Classic psychopath. Yeah.
Well, that should be an interesting tale. I understand there's already a TV series in the work for River of Ashes as well. What are you at liberty to tell me about that?
I can tell you we have a studio and we have an actor attached, and we hope to have a lot more news soon. But that's been very exciting. That's been, yeah. I grew up in the motion picture business. My father had an independent production company, so I'm very familiar with how it works and what to do and how to set up lights and shoot and everything like that. So sometimes I know a lot of writers get intimidated. They're excited to do that, but it can be an intimidating world. But for me, it's very comfortable. So, it's fun. It's been, fun. And of course, my father's like, "Yay, she's following in my footsteps." So, I mean, that's, it's exciting. It's exciting, and like I said, we hope to have a lot more news soon.
Good. Well, I will be watching for that. In addition to writing, you are also a registered advanced practice nurse and a certified wildlife rehabber. Which I love that. I mean, as resumes go, it's pretty broad. Tell me a bit about those jobs, and since this is a show about writing and the writing process, how they impact your writing.
Oh, okay. Well, I am a clinical specialist in gerontology, which is working with the elderly. I have my doctorate, and I taught nursing at a couple of local universities and stuff. So I was an old ICU OR nurse. So in that sense, and as far as the rehabbing goes with the wildlife, well, a mammal is a mammal is a mammal, so to speak. And I'm lucky enough to be married to a physician, so we can take care of all the animals. And animals are, a love of my life. I have, running around everywhere. So that was kind of like an easy transition to care for the wildlife and stuff. But in writing, I actually feel like nursing made me a better writer, because when you, as a nurse, or a physician, when you watch television shows or you read something and it's inaccurate, it goes from being a drama to a comedy. And because you look at, oh my God, how can you think of that? So and then I'd like to get things right and use that opportunity to say, okay, these are the sequences, this, and this happens. This is what's going to happen. This is how your character is going to react to that, especially in forensics. And I have a lot of forensics in this upcoming series, with dead bodies and time of death and what's at the scene and all those intricacies that are important to detailing how somebody died. So for me, all those elements are very important. How somebody lives when they get sick, if they get shot, if they get hurt, how they die, how they fall, and setting up hospitals. So, and the other element that it added to was, we always say in medicine, we see people at their best and at their worst, on their best day and their worst day. You get a lot of emotions, and you understand the emotions behind people and how they react to things. And as a nurse, you're more attuned to that. So that's helped me a great deal in my writing too, to understand how people would react in a certain situation and be genuine with it.
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree with that too. One of the things that, and of course, I read a lot of crime fiction and mystery, and one of the things that always bothers me is, I don't like gunplay anyway, but when there's gunplay, if you've ever had a gun go off near your head and you're not
it's loud.
Yeah, you're not wearing
loud.
ear protection, you can't hear anything for a while. I mean, it except ringing, right? And
right.
It never happens. You never have a character who suddenly, has to struggle to hear what's being said around them. But that's absolute reality, right? So that always bothers me when I read that.
Yeah, I watched television shows. I watched one the other day, and the person falls down, hits their head on the sidewalk, and starts bleeding. And of course, we call it LOC, loss of consciousness. And it's like, in the next scene, it's like they're sitting up in a bed in some school, and a nurse is wrapping bandages around their head. And it's like, okay, go home. And if you get lightheaded or dizzy, I'm thinking, are you kidding me? With all the concussion protocols that have been banged into every parent's head, it's like, you go to an ER and you get a CT, loss of consciousness, CT, no questions. And it's like, that's that aggravates me as, a healthcare provider. But and that's a try to reality you try to bring into things, because anybody who's got kids will tell you, oh no, you got to go to the ER, they got a concussion. Okay, I mean, people are very educated now. And I have 2 or 3 editors that I work with, and they write me, check this thing on this medical stuff. Did they do this right? And they know I'm in the business now, and I see this all the time with people writing stuff, and they just make up things. And it's like everybody's been in a hospital at some point. Everybody's had a sick family member. Just try to be accurate, because you take somebody out of the story and then they lose interest. Like you said, you can't sit there and shoot guns all the time, because it's like you have the horrible tinnitus and you're like, oh my God, you can't hear a thing.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to, get down into the minutia of these things, but you can't just
No, you can't take away from the reality, right?
Right. I've seen, TV shows or people in one scene have just taken, a high caliber bullet through the shoulder, and then the next scene they're fighting off Godzilla or something.
Yeah. And it's like, you go through the shoulder, your lungs up here. Y'all know that, right? Your lungs way up here. You hit the lung, you're out.
Right. So I appreciate a little bit of concern about getting things right along those lines. Along those lines, your childhood was definitely a lot more interesting than mine. I understand you grew up in a haunted cottage in New Orleans with a father who was a movie producer and director, and Tennessee Williams was a family friend. I'm sure I did, but did I miss anything, first of all? And then second, how did that impact your writing and what you do now?
First off, when you grow up in the French Quarter, everything's haunted. I mean, people, I don't believe in ghosts. Go spend a night in a house in the French Quarter, you will believe in ghosts. So the cottage we were in was very haunted. And it was, you'd sit there in a room and we had cats, and all the cats would watch something walk across the room all at once, and you knew somebody was in there with you. So, and you just kind of got used to it, knocking on the walls and cabinets opening and stuff. So, I mean, it was just normal for us just to have that. But yeah, my dad was in the motion picture business, and he had this little cottage on Dumaine Street. And if anybody's ever been in New Orleans, it's right across from the place called Madame John's, which is one of the oldest houses in French Quarter. But yeah, Tennessee Williams he lived on Royal, right around the corner on Royal, and he used to come by and drink coffee. And he and I spoke about writing. And I was small, I was little, but I remember the conversations, and I remember talking about how you come up with characters and how do you make them real, and him telling me about you mix people up, someone and then you add things to them, but you always want to make them somebody that you could sit down and carry on a conversation, and they're real to you. They're real to you, they're real to your reader. But he was a very, very nice man. He was very nice to me. He was always very kind to me. And he moved away. He moved to New York, I think, when I was about 9 or 10. Yeah, 8 or 9, something around that. But yeah, I grew up talking to him, and my father we had a lot of jazz musicians that would come in. Al Hurt was an old family friend, and Pete Fountain was an old family friend. And it's New Orleans, and especially in the French Quarter, everybody kind of knew everybody. And we had a painter, that Gerard DeRose, who was a famous painter in England. Jerry would always come and hang out when he always come to the city and come stay and hang out. And so I grew up with all these, it was a bohemian upbringing. So yeah, it was different. I grew up on motion picture sets, and learned how to load 35 millimeter cans and lights and run sound and do editing and all. But it was and I helped my dad write scripts. So from a very early age, that creativity was ignited. It was a different childhood, but it was fun.
Well, that's what I wonder, when creativity is fostered in you at a young age, it tends to stick,
Yeah.
and so it sounds like, and particularly, the subjects that you write about, which, there's a lot of Gothic horror, dark fantasy, I was going to ask what the draw is for you, but clearly I think you've already answered that for the most part.
It's what I know. It's when the French Quarter is a very different place because every house, every corner, everywhere you go, there's a story. There's a story to every, and it's, the city's 300 plus years old. It's not as old as some places in England, but it's still such a small community, and there's so much there. We spent time in the Lalaurie house, which anybody knows Lalaurie is. It's a very haunted mansion in the French Quarter. And you hear different stories, but what the stories aren't stuff that you hear from the guides and the haunted tours and stuff. It's the stories of the people that live in these houses that they share. And like I grew up next to, there was a voodoo priestess that lived next door to me. So I'd look over, we have high patio walls, and she'd be conducting ceremonies in her yard, and I learned about voodoo and everything from her. It was normal. And I guess if you're not raised outside of that, you look at that as like, well, that's really weird. But for me, it was normal. It was fun.
Right. Well, as I know, a lot of your work is based in Gothic horror and dark fantasy and things like that. How do you approach other kinds of storytelling? Because as I noted, you wrote a broad suite of genres. How do you approach storytelling that isn't Gothic and dark fantasy and ghosts, as opposed to how it is when you do broach those subjects? Is there anything?
Well, to any story, the bottom line for me is the characters. I consider myself a character writer, and a story is a story, but the characters sell your story. Because if you think of any movie, everything that everybody's loved, what stands out are the characters. So for me, writing a character and putting him in different situations, it doesn't, I mean, I cut my teeth on a lot of romance too. When I started writing erotica romance, regular romance, so it doesn't necessarily have to go, I just ended up going in the ghostly Gothic direction just because that's what I really like. But I started out writing romance, so I can write romance and straight up crime and suspense. And for me, it's not a big shift. It's just making sure I've got a story and solid characters in it. So I feel like I can adapt to any genre except science fiction. I can do some science fiction, I guess, if it's dark, grounded kind of science fiction. But for me, it's a question of the characters that I'm writing and the story that they fit in. So it doesn't matter what genre it is, as long as the characters and the story stand out.
What's your approach to developing characters? Specifically, do you develop them first and then build a plot around them, or do you generally have a plot that you develop characters for? Is it a mix? I mean, how does that process work for you?
First thing I really come up with is an idea or a story, and they come into my head all the time. I'll have a story. It'll be an idea where, okay, what if we did this? And that would be cool. Okay. And then building the idea, and honestly, the characters come as I write. I'll come up with an outline for the story, but as I write and as I tweak and as I go back and rewrite, the characters flesh out and develop. You do have some outlines and all that you use of how your character is going to be, but the idiosyncrasies, maybe how they talk, how they walk, a food preference, the things that make them stand out. That stuff comes as I write, and I'll write. It's like you write an outline, you do a sketch of the story, like you sketch a piece of art, and I'll write an outline, and then I'll go through and write the story, and then I go through and rewrite and add the texture and the color of the characters. The characters will probably be the last thing to come, but I'll get the story, and then the characters come as I write. It's really kind of a fluid process. It's continuously changing, and then when I feel like I've really got it, and I'm like, okay, then we can send it off, and then rip it apart again and start all over when you edit.
Right. Well, and so you mentioned you outline. Do you always outline, or do you ever work just Oh
no, I do both. I can sit down and just start writing, and start in the story. I've literally started, not know where I'm going, and just wrote and keep going like that. And it's this book, River of Ashes, is a good example of that. Came to the end and was thinking we really need something at that end, really need something to grab the reader, something that's going to be very, very different from what's expected. And that didn't come until after the book was written and about to go into editing. So, it was, like I said, it's a fluid process and constantly changing. And then, you go to an editor, and an editor will point out, well, this doesn't really work, or this doesn't work with this. And then you go back and you retweak and retool.
Yeah, let me ask you about that process too, because I've got a book in editing right now, and there's somebody that I work with, and I feel like that is something because how the industry has changed over the last 20 years or more. More and more authors now pretty much need to work with editors on their own before they ever, try to get into the latter stages.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about how you work with editors. Do you work with independent folks? I mean, what's the editing process like for you? Is there one in particular you work with? Do you work with others depending on the genre? What works for you when it comes to how you have your stuff edited?
I work with independent. I've worked with a lot of editors over the year, and what I tell everybody that's a writer, especially if you're starting out, work with a lot of different editors because they influence your writing. Because one editor will say you do this too much, you won't do that again. One editor say you really need to work on how your sentences are awkward, fix those. So, and a lot of writers have, if we get an editor that we like, we tend to stick with that person, but then our writing doesn't get better. So I tell people, get with a lot of, you've got to have a couple of different editors. And really the way it's going in this business now, most people I know have two editors. They don't just have one editor, and they'll work with two editors to go back and read, and then they'll send it to somebody to proof. So it's not, it used to be that way. You had one editor and that was it. And you maybe had somebody to proof it. It's not like that anymore. And I really find I've worked with independent editors. I've worked with editors associated with publishers, big and small. Everybody's different. Every editor sees something. Every editor has pet peeves that they don't like. I really look at editing as a negotiation. It's what you're willing to give up in the story, or what you're willing to change, or what you like or what you don't like. And what the editor is like, absolutely. And look, I have had fights on the phone with editors about things in like this story in particular, River of Ashes, because there's violence in it. And they were like, no, tone it down. And I'm like, no, the violence shows Beau's, his slide into madness. So that is essential to the character. So you've got to stand up for your book with any editor. It depends on what you want. I mean, I do find that most people like working with independent editors, but everybody should at least be with a editor that's worked with large publishing houses at least once. You learn a lot. And don't stick with the same editor. Always try to find new editors, ask around, talk to other writers. It behooves you and makes you a better writer. So as far as editors go, I have some that I like, but then I don't like to get stuck in that rut of dealing with the same person over. And I'd like to expand and find new editors. And you find editors you trust, but then you will venture out and try some different ones to get different opinions. It's like, it's like going to the grocery store. You'll have your favorite grocery store, but you want to go out to other ones because they offer different things. So in that sense, that's what you have to do as a writer these days. Absolutely.
It's really interesting. How much of your work is independently published? And what has been the best and worst parts of going that route for you? And I ask that because, again, the industry has changed so much in the last 20 years. And, we all know that used to be something very different than it is now. And, a lot of great writers now have found it's much to their advantage to go independent.
Oh, yeah.
But there's a lot of stuff with that. So what's been that process? What has that process been like for you? What ratio do you go into or go traditional? Just tell me a little bit about how that works for you.
I started indie. Um, I started indie before there was indie. My first book came out before Kindle was out. So, and I had independently published it then. And then I've been at this for 15 years. So then the Kindles came out. And I remember being at the book expo when they introduced Kindle, and everybody was like, oh, this is never going to happen. And I looked at that and said, oh no, this is a game changer. And I was independent for a number of years. Then I got an agent and then started getting with smaller publishers and, going the traditional published route. Um, there's pros and cons to each, and it's definitely a personal thing but I do find that most big writers that make it big in publishing then leave and go do indie, and they take all their readers with them, and that comes down to money and freedom, because you give up your book and you give up your story, and you have to change things when you go with bigger publishers. And a lot of people do that to get the recognition, to pick up an audience, and then they go indie for the money and for the control. It really, as a young writer, yes, it would be better if you found a publisher. You learn a lot about the business. You'll get your name out there. You'll get an audience, and then if you don't like it anymore, you can go do indie. The freedom is with indie, and more money is with indie, but the ability to get out to that audience and to find readers and to get bloggers is definitely with publishers. It's a really two-way street, and some writers don't want to give up their publisher because they like the control the publisher takes away. So all I have to worry about is writing. And some people like the indie element, but in the indie element, you have to worry about your PR. You have to worry about uploading the book and getting the print copies to, Lightning Strike or wherever you're going to send them to, and then distributing them and you're your own PR person, or you hire a PR person. Whereas if you work for a publisher, a lot of that's taken care of it for you.
Yeah.
It's not easy. Either one is not easy, because you're still going to have to be out there promoting that book no matter what you do. We're never true writers. We have to be promoters as well. And I think that's the hard part for a lot of us, because a lot of us are introverts, right? We don't want to go out there and do all that. Right. We just want to stay home and write our books.
Right. Well, one of the other things that's a constant in this industry is rejection.
Yeah.
And, some people handle it better than others. How do you deal with rejection, or even maybe just negative responses to your work? And how has it evolved over the course of your career?
Okay. In the beginning, it was devastating. It was like, you get rejection. I'm never writing again. I'm giving up. I'm going back to rehabbing squirrels, and I'm going to live a happy life. That's it. And it's hard, especially you have no confidence as a writer. You're putting yourself out there and you're like cringing as people read your book, because you don't, oh God, what are they going to do? But as you go along, and as you develop some confidence, and you have an ability, you can get a story out there, that it's liked by a majority of people and all that. And look, even the Bible gets 1-star reviews. I mean, you can't win. So you read the negative reviews, and look, that's what people that buy books do. They read the negative reviews to see what they say, because some negative reviews are actually positive. They just may not like an aspect of the story, but they like everything else. It doesn't hurt as much. It used to. Sometimes you just look at it and go, okay. especially today. I as it was a couple of years ago, people are so much more critical now, especially a book, and it's just it tends to numb you to that. I mean, I can honestly say 5 or 6 or even 7 years ago in the indie business, it was not like this. People weren't critical. People weren't critical of each other, weren't attacking each other. And so now when you get reviews like that are not necessarily a review, but sometimes just an attack,
yeah.
You get reviews, and when you get stuff like that, you just
well on. What seems to happen, and I don't think it happens broadly, but I have colleagues in this business who have suffered massive troll attacks, because didn't like the theme of the book. So rather than commenting on the book, it became very political. And as we all know right now,
exactly.
the political scenarios are awful. So that's the weird thing about that interaction to me. Now, I agree with you. I think that seems to be across the country or across of all of society. We've become this.
Everybody attacks, and it's like,
yeah, it feels like we're losing some sense of grace in our society. We
oh
don't
yeah,
know how to just be nice to people, and if you don't like it, then don't read it or what have you. No, you must go in and crush their soul. Right?
I mean, maybe it's me, but I mean, I remember growing up. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. What happened to that?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's the attacks, and even the writers attacking other writers. Somebody that writes a story that's similar to somebody else's, like you said, sends their trolls to attack that author's work and post a bunch of negative reviews. I don't get it. I don't get it. I mean, a review is a review of the story, not the political views, whether you like this writer or if this writer is somebody that's in direct contrast with the writer you follow. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah.
So, and I'm honestly, and all that has made me really kind of just tune out all the negative reviews, because that's what you're looking at now. And if you can't fight that.
Right. Well, the one other aspect that a lot of writers deal with, or one other situation a lot of writers deal with, is writer's block. And you're pretty prolific. It doesn't seem like it affects you, but then I also know that I think every writer deals with it to some extent. How have you dealt with the times in your life when the words were coming a lot harder than others? Do you have a process to get through it when you say, okay,
yeah, I get in my car and I drive.
Okay.
If I can't work out a story, I literally will get in my car and drive, and it works itself out. For me, if there's something, this isn't working, or I don't like this, where this is going, walk away, and I'll fix it. It'll come back. And I don't give up on it. I'll just be like, okay. Honestly, driving, I get in my car, I drive to Walmart, drive to the grocery store. I have a lot of animals, so I spend a lot of time at Walmart. So I mean, and then by the time I come home, I've figured it out.
Yeah, that's not too dissimilar from what I do. I'll take a long walk with my dog somewhere.
Get away. I just tell people, step away, go out, do something, and get your mind off of it, and it'll come to you.
Right. Clear the space. Well, I only have one more question, and I always like it to be a fun question, something where we end on something that I mean it to be fun. I hope it's fun. So let's just say I had the power to put you together for dinner, drinks, conversation, whatever you want, with any one of the following three people. Tell me who you would choose and why. The options I will give you are the late Marlon Perkins, who some of us old enough to will remember.
I remember him,
yeah. Joan of Arc, who we all ought to know who Joan of Arc is, or somebody very close to home in New Orleans, the Marie Laveau, the famous.
Oh, the Voodoo Queen.
Yes.
Put
you together with any one of those three, who would you choose and why?
Miss Marie, as everybody calls her down here. When you say Miss Marie, everybody knows who you're talking about. I would not want to meet with her because they want no. She was a very powerful woman. It would be Joan of Arc.
Okay.
It would definitely be Joan of Arc. This little girl, how she took over an army, and especially with her power, and made them listen to her. That to me was, any woman will be like, how do you get an army of men to listen to you? And I mean, she did it, and she did it with her words, she did it with her actions, and then her unyielding belief. She was just, I think, yeah, she would be a very interesting woman to meet, because, think about it, she motivated an entire army to turn around and win, and defeat the English, and she was their battering ram, so to speak. So yeah, really just like to see the personality behind who she is, because I don't think history really has gotten that right. I don't think anybody's really figured that one out. So yeah, Joan of Arc.
Outstanding. Well, Alex, thanks again for taking the time to join us here today on the open mic. I'm anxiously awaiting August 2nd to get the book. So I think this sounds like a lot of fun. Some deliciously evil fun, I guess, maybe.
Oh yeah, lots of evil.
And I will definitely keep an eye out too for whatever TV comes out of all this. So you have to drop me a line and let me know how that progresses. And I'll definitely make a point of sharing it with the folks who pay attention to what I have to say at any given time. So if you are not one of those people, let me just say, hit subscribe. This would be a really good time to hit subscribe, because every week or so I come on with some really, really smart people like Alex here who will talk about how they do what they do. So until then, Alex, once again, thanks. I appreciate it very much. Great.
Thank you.
Success. I'm Rich Ehisen. This is the open mic. I'll leave you with only one final thought, which is tomorrow is not promised to any of us. So please make today count. We'll see you next time on the open mic.